Franco, and I'm the Executive Director of the Marion Institute. We're very happy to be hosting this event with Dr. Thom, and we're hosting it with four of our various programs of our 5 core areas of the Marion Institute. And before we begin the programming, I'd like to introduce you to our Biomed Program Director, Ms. Jane Dolan, who really made this event possible. So without further ado,
great crowd. I know many faces here, and we're going to have a wonderful time this evening. There's lots of reasons to be here tonight. We have the Connector series combining the Biomed programs, and of course there's a lot of excitement about a new clinic that's being built here in Providence. The clinic is underway, it's under construction, and it is due to be completed by the end of summer. So, very exciting. It's my pleasure here to have Dr. Thom, who's a renowned naturopath and Bruins fan. And he is going to share his story and his journey of how he's arrived here. So please let us all welcome Dr. D.
We've been on this journey for almost 5 decades. It seems a long time to be practicing medicine. So over the course of the last 5 decades, my evolution in medicine has changed considerably. So I started off as it says up there, as a dentist. So 5 decades ago, I started a dental school because I always thought I wanted to be a dentist. When I was in my 2nd year of dental school, I met my wife, who I've now been married to for 46 years. But you know, when I met her, she was not in the greatest health for a number of different reasons. And over the course of the next few years, as we continue to try and figure out what her challenges were, and her going to doctor and doctor, now if I look back on it, and those of you who were around in the 70s, everybody, you didn't know what it was, everybody had hypoglycemia. If you'd gone in the 80s, everybody had candida. If you'd gone in the 90s, everybody had chronic fatigue, and then fibromyalgia, and now everybody has Lyme disease. And the symptoms are all the same. It doesn't matter which name you put on it, you can basically say that the symptoms of all those conditions are the same. So after 4 or 5 years of this, and really not getting much better, you sort of start to search, as people with Lyme now start to search, trying to find out what we're going to do about how we get better. So I started my own search back in the day, and I met a physician who happened to live in Portland, Oregon at the time. And I spoke to him, and he said, well, I think, you know, why don't we look at this, why don't we look at that? So she went to Portland, Oregon for a few weeks. She came back, and over the course of the next few months, there was a definite change as far as her health was concerned, which was intriguing to me. So that put me on a search of, well, what did she do differently that the last 5 or 6 years of searching found nothing? So over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, I read several hundred books on health. And I just, if it said health, if it said wellness, healing, I said, oh, that's worth reading. And it became very evident that no matter who was the writer, what type of medicine was about, it was all about, there was a theme that went through that. And in the course of that theme, it became evident that as a dentist, I was putting mercury fillings in people's teeth, and it became very evident that in the 1970s, which wasn't very popular, to not do mercury fillings, that I was doing something that I didn't think made much sense anymore. So at that point in the 1970s, I started saying, I'm not going to put mercury fillings in anymore. So I stood up in front of a group of 1,200 dentists and said, we're making a huge mistake, and I immediately lost my license because of that. Because in the 1970s, it wasn't very popular to tell people to not do mercury amalgams. So it's not that it's totally popular now, but at least it's not as unpopular as it was in those days. So anyway, it put me on a new search, and it allowed me to basically then go back to school, and 32 years ago, I then became a naturopath. And so what I'm going to share with you this evening is the journey that I've been on for the last 32 years that's led to opening this clinic in a few months here in this wonderful city. So I'm not just going to talk, I'm going to have a bit of a discussion, hopefully back and forth, for what's going on, because what I'd like you to leave with is some provoking thought about, your present idea of what health is, where it is that we're going, how have we got to the present state of health where we are, and what can we do about, and what will this clinic that we're going to be opening here offer you people as local residents. So the first thing is, I ask the question is, what does healthy mean? What does the word healthy mean? Being healthy means what to you?
Pain-free.
Disease-free.
Pain-free.
Pain-free.
Vital.
Vital.
100% function 100% of the time.
100% function 100% of the time. Not possible, but it's interesting. So, what it means to most people, chagrin, is healthy means despite doing everything you can, you're still going to get sick. Because getting sick is part of being healthy. It's an important component of being healthy. Because if you don't become ill, unfortunately, you will end up with something that's much worse, called chronic disease. So, which sort of goes against a lot of people's thought process about, really, I have to get sick to be well. The same way that if you never tuned your car up, never changed the spark plugs, eventually your car wouldn't run very efficiently. If you don't tune up your body, the body won't run very well either as time goes on. So the inescapable illness we'll end up talking about. So what I prefer to look at health is, how do we allow an individual to reach what we call their optimal performance? Optimal performance is totally based on what it is that you come into this world with. Because depending how well you chose your parents and grandparents will have an impact on what you're presently dealing with as an individual. So we're going to look at all aspects. And so health isn't just about not being sick, because being sick is actually part of health. It's looking at how everything balances together so that we can try and create optimal performance when we look at these 7 specific areas that are necessary to truly be in a state of your optimal performance or optimal wellness. And when I talk about, and the reason I changed my personal thinking to optimal performance is because when I started treating autistic children, or children with Down syndrome, or children with cystic fibrosis, and you say, well, they're never going to be able to do what this other person who doesn't have that particular defect. However, it doesn't mean that you can't get them to their optimal performance. And an autistic child, for me, was to be able to get them to a point where they could be self-sufficient. So when I can get an autistic child to be self-sufficient, live on their own, be able to do a job, I would call that a pretty high level of optimal performance, even though they may not be performing at a level that someone else may think that you should be performing at. But so everybody has to look at individually. What's interesting about the aspect of optimal performance is, the most important one there is the occupation one. As you know, that with this one here, 60% of people in this country hate their job, which may be the first thing that they have to do to be healthy. They need to quit their job. Because the most common day for heart attacks is Monday morning. It's no surprise. It's no accident that Monday morning is when most people have a heart attack, statistically. And so, as a biological doctor, some of the things, the first thing you do is you need to change your job. Because that may be the thing that is the most impediment to you ever getting better. So the World Health Organization basically published this 70 years ago. They haven't changed their definition in the last 70 years. I like to look at it more from the aspect of looking at how do we look at everything. How do your belief system, where does your belief system come from? It comes from your parents, your grandparents, it comes from your cultural upbringing, it comes from who you were around when you were growing up. All these things have an impact on health. And so we look at health really as this state of homeostasis, this place of balance. And I think if we go back to Bernard, who is considered to be the father of physiology, what he said, and how critical it is in today's world, that all vital mechanisms, the vital mechanisms, what I refer to here is how every single organ system in your body works. So, there's no such thing as, an individual just has one organ system. You all have a heart, you all have a cardiovascular system, you all have a digestive system, you all have an endocrine system, and you all have an immune system, you all have a respiratory system. You know, none of them work independently. They all work with each other. And it's my belief that specialization is one of the most detrimental things that's ever happened in medicine. Because you can't go to one doctor without looking at the whole. And Bernard said that. The role of every organ is to do one thing. That's to allow survival. Survival so that we can be recreated, procreated. So human physiology is simply the study of looking at all organ systems working together as a unit as opposed to an individual. And unfortunately, one of the challenges people have, people think health is this 12-week journey. You know, do I have to keep doing this? You mean I have to still not eat this gluten stuff? Really? You mean I do have to move every day? Is that really, can I not stop doing that? No, you need to do it ongoing. So really what health is simply a balance of what we now understand as genetics. And you know, one of the challenges with genetics now is that medicine is trying to moving towards that, oh, we're going to have it all figured out. In fact, we haven't figured it out. We know the genetic code, discovered or uncovered in 2003. One of the challenges, however, with the genetic code is that when they decoded the entire DNA sequence, they realized that they made a huge mistake in their assumption about what our code was going to be. In 1978, when the Human Genome Project started to try and uncover what our chromosomes were doing, the assumption was that we would have between 100 and 150,000 proteins, because that's what a gene does. It codes for a protein. So everything about our body is a protein. Your hair, your skin, your organs, etc. However, when they decoded the entire code in 2003, they realized that we had less than 25,000 genes, but we have 150,000 proteins. They said, okay, so our theory is wrong. Genes don't code for one protein. It codes for multiple proteins, which that led to the whole idea of epigenetics, which is I think a very exciting component of thinking about medicine. Because when you look at epigenetics, what it means is you can change how the gene expresses itself. That's how you can create cure. That's how you can heal. There's no such thing anymore as an incurable disease, because we have the ability to alter how our genes divide, and we can move people down a different path than they would have otherwise thought that they were going to move down. With one exception, recently with the two astronauts, or the astronaut who was in space, the twin who was in space for a year, and his brother who wasn't. And they've now found that even though they're identical twins, being in space for a year had changed that twin and its gene by 8%. Wow. Which is like, wow, we didn't think those genes ever changed, but they are different. So we have something beyond now even epigenetics. You know, that who knows where that research will lead one day. So what we have is we have all these different organ systems. We have all these different organ systems, and unfortunately we have a lot of different specialists who don't look at any other organ system and somehow think you'll get better if we just look at one organ system. So just to have created an understanding of, you know, what is the biological process, what is the healing process, what is supposed to happen, you know, starting literally at conception. So we eventually develop normal function through all these organs, and like it or not, we live in this world. And in this particular world, we get exposed to a variety of different things that are not us. They're not part of us. Whether it's food or whether it's air, you know, there are things foreign to us. Now, when something is foreign to us, the body has to respond. So it reacts to that. It somehow creates a reaction. And the reaction that it creates, we are known as a discharge and inflammation, aka a symptom that we have. So when you get a cold, what happens to you? What symptoms do you get? Aches, pains, runny nose. So we think that's bad, right? So what's the treatment of that? Stop. the exact thing that you can't do. Because what's supposed to happen is that discharge allows your body to go back to a healthy state of normal function. So how have we created disease? By stopping the normal reaction that the body is always meant to do. So what's the best way to treat a cold? Do nothing. Turn your cell phone off, don't go to work, fast, drink water, go to bed, see you in 2 days. That's what we should be doing. Not, oh, I need to go to work tomorrow, or my child has to go to daycare, so I'm going to have to do something, so I just got to power through this, and I wonder why it takes forever. So the reason that we need this process is because being minimally, you need to be ill at least once a year. So I'm sure the flu here was just as bad as it was in Arizona, even though it's a lot warmer in Arizona than it was here. The reality is, it's not the flu, it's not the bug that somebody dies from, as we'll see as time goes on. We need to get sick in order to tune us up, because it allows this process to go back to normal. So what is disease? Disease, which has this underlying inflammatory component, is basically, we break the word up into two, and it simply means that something isn't working properly. It's that simple. Some system is out of balance. Some system is not fully functioning the way it should, so it happens on any particular level. So when we look at the same graph, it becomes a continuous imbalance in any one of these areas. So unfortunately, that's where we have this idea of specialization. So if you're having high blood pressure, let's say, and you go to the cardiologist, and he says, well, you need to do this. They say, oh, by the way, I have some reflux. Oh, well, we don't know anything about that. You have to go to the gastroenterologist. Well, I'm getting headaches. Well, now you should go to the neurologist. But you know, the head is kind of attached to the heart, and it's kind of attached to the digestive system. It's all one person, and it's all one problem. So the challenge is, when you start specializing to physicians who know a lot about their specialty, but who know, unfortunately, less about how the whole body works. So it's my belief that when you go and see a specialist, they're not really looking at the whole problem. And unfortunately, specialized medicine, I think, has led us further down the path of chronic disease. When we look at what happens in the chronic disease process, because when this discharge is not allowed to complete itself, is not allowed to go to a specific entity, what ends up happening is you get an insufficient reaction. So people don't really recover. So they say, well, I go over the cold, but my energy still hasn't come back. Or my digestive system still hasn't come back. Or, you know, maybe I need to take more thyroid hormone because, you know, something isn't right. I'm still gaining weight. You know, what's going on? And that's because we have interfered with the natural physiologic and biological processes that the body has. And when you keep doing that long enough, you end up what we call the chronic disease process. Started, when do you think it starts? When is the first type of intervention to stop this? Right, a baby. So, you know, what baby is a cold, go to the pediatrician. What does the pediatrician have to do? Or what do they do? They have an earache. Pediatrician says, take an antibiotic. What's an antibiotic going to do to the potential of a discharge? It's going to not allow the discharge to happen. Now, does that mean the child has to suffer with an earache? Not at all, because there's many other ways to support that. You don't have to, you know, it's not like you don't do anything. We just support it in a different way, but we support it through a natural physiologic process as opposed to going against it. Now imagine if you do something over a period of time, how often this natural discharge has been impeded. And it's well known that women who take a course of 17 courses of antibiotics, which may sound like a lot, but that's over 25 years. 17 courses of antibiotics over 25 years triples the chance that the woman will get breast cancer. That's the only factor. different. Now, that's less than 1 course of antibiotics a year. Sinus infection, urinary tract infection, respiratory infection. I mean, they're given out often. And we start stepping back and we look at the types of things, how often we prevent this discharge. And then what are the consequences? The consequences are the disease process that doesn't show up for 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. That's why we're not correlating what's happening to our children and our grandchildren to what happens to somebody who's 40 or 50 or 60 years of age. So the whole idea is that, you know, the chronic problem, unfortunately, is something that requires intervention. When it gets to that point, it's not going to get better on its own. You truly do need to see a practitioner of some venue. If we look at the staggering statistics of what chronic disease is, 50% of the world has chronic disease. 7 billion people. 3.5 billion people have a chronic disease. 81 million Americans by 2020, but the most, this is the last one. 99% of disease management is in the hands of the individuals and their families. 99% of disease management is not the doctor. It's the individual, which is, really? You mean I have to do something? You mean the doctor can't just give me the magic pill and I'm supposed to get better? Now, to take that even a step further, it's even a more staggering thought of the amount of time that the doctor spends with you. So one day has 1,440 minutes, a week has 10,080, a month has 42,000. And your doctor visit once a month is what, 30 minutes? Or less? Or less? Well, it's less than 1% of the entire month you're with the doctor. How do you expect the doctor to fix it in less than 1% of your time if you're not doing the work the 99% of the time? You know, it's like somebody has to look in the mirror and say, who is truly responsible for what's going on here? So, the magical annual visit, 0.005%, which is nothing. It's like a drop in the bucket as far as how much time the doctor can actually spend with you as to what you need to do for yourself. Therefore, chronic disease requires intervention. And so if we take this process on, continue it, when you get into this disease process, now the tissues start to break, let's fall apart. They don't work well. They start to try and have to compensate, and you go to a doctor and they say, oh, I'm sorry to tell you, you now have disease X. You now have a diagnosis. Now it's broken. Now we'll see if we can fix it, although we can't fix it because you have a disease we can't fix. But maybe we can help you feel better. So take X, Y, and Z. Nothing about getting better. Nothing about how did I get here. We know how you got there. There's no mystery about how we got there, which I'm going to share with you as we're going on. So the whole idea of the clinic that we're going to be opening here is to go through what we're going to call biological medicine. So the first thing that has to be is to be able to figure out what is the problem. Where truly is the problem? Not, oh, I have a high blood pressure. So you say, well, do you want somebody to treat high blood pressure, or do you want to know why you have high blood pressure? Because if you treat the high blood pressure, you stop taking it, your high blood pressure comes back. If you figure out why you have it, when you treat that, it doesn't come back anymore. That's really what our focus is. And then once we've established that, to be able to figure out how we can truly create a detoxification process as well as a stimulation process with a variety of different types of therapies. There are no incurable diseases. There are only incurable patients. There is every disease that's ever existed. Somebody's been cured of it. So the body has the ability to cure it. There's no such thing as an incurable disease anymore, even the genetic ones. So we have to look at the whole idea of multiple components that's underlying that, which is why biological medicine is really not about treating your signs and symptoms. So one of the most disappointing things that I'll say to patients, or that they're always chagrined about, is they come with with a diagnosis of whatever, this and that, and I say, well, I don't treat that because I don't know how to treat disease. I'm a health practitioner. I treat health. So you have migraines, you have pre-MS, you have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, you have toenail fungus. I don't treat any of that. I treat patients who have that, but I don't treat the disease, because that's not your problem. Your problem is, why do you have the disease? That's much more from a biological medicine perspective, and that's more the so-called whole body approach. You have to look at every single organ system. You can't be a specialist in biological medicine because you can't focus on one organ system over another. You have to be looking at every organ system all the time. So if I ask the question, why do we get sick? Why do people get sick? What do you think the most common answer is? Bugs. Bugs. What's another common reason? Stress. Is that it? Bugs and stress? Solve everybody's problems? Consider it all your stress?
Genetic
Toxins, toxicity,
vaccines, mercury.
all that stuff. And it is definitely the number 6 is the most common that people believe. Now, all winter long you hear about get a flu shot, get your flu shot, get your flu shot, as if that's the problem. That's not the problem. It never has been the problem. In fact, when you look at microbial disease, it has a lot less to do with the pathogen than it does with the susceptibility. Unfortunately, 4,000 or 5,000 people passed away this past winter with the flu. Now, why didn't another 100,000 people pass away with the flu? Because they were in a position of susceptibility. The 4,000 or 5,000 people who did were, for other reasons. It's not the flu. It wasn't the flu. They were in a place of susceptibility. Otherwise, everybody who got the flu, and thousands of people, some of you probably had the flu. Well, why didn't you pass away? Because your susceptibility wasn't the same as somebody else. So it's not about the pathogen. It's not about, oh, we had the wrong strain of flu that was 13% effective. But you should still get the flu shot anyway. It's like, maybe we should be talking about other things, like maybe you should change your diet. You should maybe take some probiotics and take some vitamin C, other things like that. So when we look at things like Lyme, for example, and we really say that Borrelia or some co-infection is really the problem, it's not the problem. It just happens to be a susceptibility issue as to all the other things that are sort of lying on top of that, which is why, for my practice anyway, giving antibiotics for Lyme is like, well, I help you feel better, but 10 years from now, we'll probably be in the same place. We're not getting anywhere, because we're not really dealing with what the underlying susceptibility. So what is the real problem? What's the real problem? What is really going on that's underlying this thing? And some people will say, oh, it's since I had the concussion, or since I had all those root canals done, or since some dentist put all those mercury fillings in my teeth, or since I had a vaccination, or since I had this bad burn, or since, unfortunately, I had I was raped. And, none of those are really the cause. Those are triggers. The real cause is how well you chose your parents. Because your parents gave you, miasm has to do with how your immune system works, temperament is your personality, and your constitution is, how tall you are, the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, etc. That's all been predetermined. Every one of you in this room fall into those categories. And depending what you've been handed from your generations will determine what happens when you get exposed to these things. Because what we've learned in the last 20 or 30 years is that it isn't the actual event that's the problem. It's the perception of the event that's the issue. So they would take identical twins, same situation, same circumstance, and one says, that's nothing, and the other one says, oh my God, I can't go on. It's exactly the same event. So it's not the event that's the issue, it's what we call the learned perception of the event. That's what ultimately determines the nature of the type of conditions that you as an adult will experience. We now know you can predict by simply looking at a child's history who's going to get cancer. You can predict who's going to have heart disease. You can predict who's going to have autoimmune disease by looking at their childhood, based on their learned perceptions of the events of their life. Which is like, well, maybe we should be studying a lot more about understanding what childhood history is. And maybe we should stop giving kids, iPads. They're not supposed to be looking at any type of a screen before age of 2. Between 2 and 5, they're supposed to be limited to a maximum of an hour, but yet iPads and those things have become the babysitter. I mean, that's what we do now. It's like, it's one of the worst possible things we can do. This is an amazing statistic when we look at what the mind is capable of. So, we tend to think that, we spend most of our time on our conscious mind, but in reality, we only spend a very small percentage of our life in our conscious mind. Most of what we do is all in our subconscious. In fact, if we looked at a single event, such as what's happening right now, at every second, your conscious mind is picking up about 40 bits of information. In the same second, your unconscious mind is picking up 20 million bits of information. Everything you've ever been exposed to is all in there. It's all inside your brain. We can't get it out, not very easily, but it's all in there. So everything you've ever experienced, literally from the time you were conceived to today, is all buried in your brain. And what that determines is the nature of the type of challenges that you will have as you grow up into an adult. And it's not like, oh, poor you. Yeah, it's unfortunate. It said if you chose your parents unwisely, and you're probably going to have a bit more trouble than somebody else will. That's kind of the way it goes. But it's interesting to look at what our subconscious belief leads us to. Beliefs, creativity, developmental stages, emotions, habits, imaginations, intuition, long-term memory, protective reactions, values. Oh, that's consciousness. No, that's all subconsciousness. Those are all types of things that happen in your unconscious mind. The one time you can sort of delve into that is when you dream. It's when you can sort of tap into your unconsciousness. And everybody dreams, but they don't remember it. Some people more than others. And if you only sleep 6 hours, you're not going to remember your dreams because you don't get into REM sleep long enough for the most part, as we'll see. So 6 hours of sleep, we know, for many reasons, is totally insufficient to truly try and understand what health is about, as we're about to see. So what we're really looking at, things that are potentially a lot closer to what's underlying. And that first one, my belief, is probably the number one. It's the emotional aspects that happen to us as children. That pretty much becomes the learned perception that leads to this role of chronic disease, unfortunately. So what's the real cause? That's the real cause. When do we start violating natural laws? Day one. Day one. It's like, wow, we spend our entire life never following a natural law. Like, it's amazing we get as far as we do. So when we talk about natural laws, we say, well, what's a natural law? What's a natural law that every single person, all 7 billion of us on this planet, have to do every single day? Sleep.
Go to that.
Yeah, we have to evacuate.
Sunlight.
Sunlight, breathe,
Exercise.
exercise, move, eat, drink. Every single human requires those basic necessities. And this recent publication of 1914 basically said, the primary cause of disease is violation of nature's laws. Excessive eating, too much alcohol, coffee, tea, overwork, night work, fear, worry, poor air quality, lack of exercise, and loveless marriages. 1914. Could we have said that was 2018? No different. Hasn't changed. It's the same problem in the last century. You get back into the 1800s, and it would be the same thing. So it's like, oh, we have these new diseases. Oh, we have new names of diseases. Well, we don't have new diseases. And if you look at the 10 leading causes of death in 1900, it said, oh, most of them were infectious. But look, people were still dying of heart disease, and they're still dying of cancer in 1900. They're not new diseases. In fact, the unfortunate statistic about cancer, some of you will still be here, by 2050, not that long, only 32 years from now, 100% of people will have cancer, statistically. Right now, 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women, statistically, 2018. It's like, wow. What are we going to do about changing that type of a statistic? And unfortunately, it's not about donating money to the American Cancer Society, because they ain't kind of looking in the right place. Because you're not going to find the cure after you have cancer. You have to find the cure before you get cancer. That's the true cure of what ends up happening. And if we look at what's happened over the last those 100 years, you know, it started off that infectious disease was big, but then heart disease became a problem. Now, as you see, cancer is basically increasing. And if you take out, technically already by 2018, if you take out people over 85 just dying, you know, the heart just stops. Cancer is actually the #1 cause of death in Western society now, which is a staggering statistic, unfortunately. So, what are we going to do about that? What can you do about that? We said 99% of what you need to do is, or what for chronic disease, is what you do individually, not what the doctor can do for you. So, we look at the so-called natural laws. How do we incorporate, the goal is when you leave, you start incorporating, if you're not doing some of these, into everyday life. And so these, what I'm going to share is, these are the types of treatments that everybody needs to do. I don't want you sitting in this room, but your families, your kids, your grandkids, you know, everybody, your neighbors, they're natural laws. Everybody needs to be doing these things. These are the types of things, you know, when you go to the doctor should educate you to them, although you won't have to because you'll know them tonight. But generally, these are the types of things, if you truly want to prevent something, this is how you're going to prevent it, by following a natural law. So if we look back, you know, physiologically, what the, you know, the base of this triangle, this is what everybody needs to do. Breathe, eat food, water, sex, sleep, homeostasis, and excretion are all natural laws in our society, on this planet. And of course, based on, you know, an individual, based on a culture, your culture based on where you were born, you know, those types of traditions, religious, spiritual, etc. There'll be some variations of those types of things, how you interact with that. But the reality is, we all need to do these things on an everyday basis for ourselves in order to get to a point that will facilitate your body moving to its so-called place of optimal wellness, optimal performance, we'll say. So, you don't have as much fortune as I do to get out of the sun, because some days you probably don't have much. You know, I live in a state that has over 300 days of sunshine. So it's not a problem to get this one in Arizona. You know, but that said, it still means you have to get outside. There's so much positive research by just being outside 4 walls because of environmental things, or there's a lot of other factors. Obviously, the sun would be better. I'm sure when we don't change our clocks in Arizona, like most. Did you change the clocks here? Yes. You know, most people, they smile more when they have an hour more daylight, understandably. And when the sun comes in the summertime, your days are longer. People are generally happier in general. It's not an accident that people are in a better mood. We do know that sun brings that particular component. Believe it or not, this is the hardest one for most people. It's hard, it's really a sad state of affairs when we think, wow, what did I do today to have fun? And I've asked so many people this over the years, and they'll often just sort of sit there and stare into space and not know how to answer the question. They don't know what they do that has fun. which is a pretty sad state of affairs. So what I suggest is every night when you go to bed, you should ask yourself, what did I do today to have fun? And if you say nothing, you better get out of bed, go and do something that's fun, and then get back in bed, because having fun is one of the ways you get your system into a parasympathetic state, which allows you to have a more restful sleep. So every individual has to find what it is that they need to do to basically have fun, because it's very individual. It doesn't matter what it is, but it shouldn't involve your work. It shouldn't really necessarily even involve your family. It can, but it doesn't have to. It should just involve something that totally gets you out of your day-to-day routine of everything that you do. That's what we're trying to avoid, to get away from that particular aspect. Breathing is potentially the most important function that you need to do for yourself on an everyday basis. The reason we know that is because if you don't, for the next 5 minutes, breathe, you won't be with us anymore. The aspect of breathing, the aspect of, I'll say yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, is not about postures. It's about learning how to breathe properly. It's learning how to totally expand your lungs, how to depress your diaphragm, how to stimulate your digestive organs from breath. We know that puts people into a parasympathetic state. You know, it's an interesting statistic that on average 12 times a minute, which is about when most people will unconsciously breathe, means 17,000 plus breaths a day. All we're asking is you take 17,000 unconscious breathing and turn it in 100 of those into conscious breathing, where you think about actually taking a deep breath, which means you only take perhaps 3 or 4 breaths in that minute as opposed to 12. When you do that type of behavior, what it ends up doing is the body learns to feel much more comfortable. It's much more comfortable when it's in a relaxed position. When it's in that particular state, you will get much more into what we call the parasympathetic state, which is the state that most people never get into because we live in such a high sympathetic dominant world. If you practice it for 3 months, you will probably have to stop consciously thinking about it because your body will automatically start doing unconscious breathing because it knows you feel better. So in order to get to 3 months, we suggest that you make little signs. Put a sign on your bathroom mirror, your refrigerator, the dashboard of your car, etc. You stand in the bank, you stand at the grocery line. You know, instead of just reading some brag magazine that's sitting there about, you know, who's sleeping with who, it's like, do a few deep breaths instead of getting more stressed out about things. It's an interesting aspect of looking at our body composition. You know, you probably realize that the greatest component of your body is water. You know, a baby especially. A baby is 75 to 80% water. In other words, it's just a balloon. It's a balloon full of water. A bunch of skin on the outside. You know, some floppy bones, kind of a little flop. It's floppy because it's just full of water. Now, as we get older, of course, the amount of hydration decreases. You know, and the average woman and man being about 60% hydrated, a woman being about 55% hydrated. It's very, very rare to see any patient in our clinic who comes even close to that as far as the state of hydration. Virtually everybody is cellularly dehydrated, but they'll say, but I drink, you know, 8 glasses of water, or I drink, you know, 100 ounces of water. You're still dehydrated. It's one thing to drink it because the next statement is, but I have to be close to the bathroom because as soon as I drink it, I gotta go to the bathroom. In other words, it just runs right through. That's not drinking water to get it inside your cells. We need water to get inside your cells, not just to run through this tube from your mouth to your, you know, to your urinary tract in general. The other interesting thing about that is you should never be thirsty. You should never be thirsty because if you are thirsty, it means you've already reached this point of more than 3% dehydration. It only takes 1% dehydration to be in this state of mental performance and physical coordination issues. So we hear all the time, people are always worried about, I forgot this, I'm forgetting that, and they always say, well, I'm getting Alzheimer's. Well, I mean, there's some aspect that may be true, but that's generally not the issue. The number one treatment, if you can't focus and can't concentrate, is to hydrate yourself more. Because the brain is probably dehydrated. Because it's one of the organs that does dehydrate fairly easily. Now, we'll talk at the end about one of the biggest problems, and it's not necessarily just about drinking more water. It's about drinking water that can get inside your cell. Because it's not the water outside your cell that matters, it's the water inside your cell that truly matters. So how much water should you drink? The general rule of thumb, and this is a general rule of thumb, assuming you don't have chronic kidney disease or chronic heart disease, is about you take your body weight in pounds and you divide it in half. That's the number of ounces of water you should drink on a daily basis. And we're talking water. It's not coffee, not a glass of wine, not juice, it's water. And everything else is over and above that from the actual state of hydration. And for some people, that's a lot of water. Yeah, that's a lot of water. But that's because your body is in a state of dehydration and you can't properly, your cells will not function when they're dehydrated. It's like they just literally become somewhat shriveled up. So we have this upside down pyramid where water is truly the most important thing that you need to do for yourself. It's much, much more important to be drinking water than it is to be eating food. You can live for 2 months technically without food. You only live for a few days without water and a few minutes without air. So, in that particular importance. And everybody has, what type of water should we be drinking? And, you drink alkaline water, you do this, you do that. The water you shouldn't be drinking shouldn't be coming straight out of the tap. The main reason is we don't need the chlorine. Chlorine is great until you turn the tap on, because in the public water system, it has to go through all these pipes. But once it gets to the faucet that you're about to drink it, you don't need the chlorine anymore. So you need something at that place to filter it out. This is a relatively inexpensive filter that you can purchase for a couple $100. You can get a smaller one. You can put swamp water in there. And what comes out this big is totally clean water. It's a great, inexpensive type of filter that you can do. It takes about, you fill this up, there's filters obviously inside this. It filters down, it takes about 30 minutes for it to be totally filtered. It's a great, inexpensive filter for anybody. People who hike in that, you can take a little version. You always worry about potable water. This will basically filter it out. One of the things that I've sort of changed my mind about is exercise, or movement, is a better term. Now, what we see on television, what you see advertised and have for years, is all this, all these, fitness places. But when you really look at the fitness places, what are they really promoting? Are they really promoting health? And the reality is they're not. What they're promoting is something that they're selling. It isn't health. They're selling a membership of some type. So I totally changed my belief on what movement should be. And I now say what you need to be doing is not exercise. What you need to be doing is what's called functional fitness. What do you want to be able to do, let's say, when you're 80 years old? The goal would be when you're 80, well, I hope I can still sit down on the toilet, stand up. I hope when I'm lying in bed, I'm going to be able to stand up out of bed. I hope I'm going to be able to walk when I'm 80 years old and move around. I hope if I drop, a $100 bill on the sidewalk, I'm going to be able to bend over and pick it up. That's Those are the things that we need to be able to do. That's the type of things you need to be doing for yourself on an everyday basis. It's not going, some people go to the gym and they say, oh yeah, I bench pressed 100 pounds today. And I said, and what's your job? You work at a computer? It's like your computer weighs 100 pounds? Are you a football player? Like, if your occupation is not such that you're an Olympic athlete or you're a professional sports person, what are we trying to achieve? We're not trying to achieve something saying, oh, I'm going to look better. Isn't it great? It's nice you want to look better. I'm more worried about what goes on inside you. And the reason I've shifted this way is because in our clinic, we have all ends of the spectrum. We have professional sports players that come into our clinic. We have people who do this crazy thing called CrossFit. And now we have people on the other end who have stage 4 cancer. And you know, if I mixed up their labs, took the name off, and showed it to some of you, the physicians, and said, tell me who's the athlete and tell me who the person with stage 4 cancer is. And you know what? It's hard to tell. Because these people who are doing this ridiculous type of exercise are driving their metabolism looking like they're chronically ill, which means they're going to get ill a lot sooner. So it's like, unless it's your occupation, that is not the type of exercise you should be doing. You know, unless your occupation is to run a marathon, what the hell are you doing running a marathon? Not that people shouldn't run marathons. But is that good? Do you want to run a marathon when you're 80 years old? If you do, then you should run marathons. The other thing that we need to look at from a fitness perspective is it needs to be sustainable. So whatever activity you do, you should be able to stop and 10 minutes later repeat exactly the same activity. If you don't, you're stretching your metabolic needs beyond what the body is capable of doing. So if you want to be able to run 10 miles when you're 80, don't start off immediately trying to run 10 miles. You know, if you run 1 mile. So we're here, trying to get over here. We don't start here and go here. We start here and go here. And then when you're there, you want to go a little further. So you make it a very gradual process so that it's truly a sustainable activity. So yes, some type of aerobics. Yes, some type of resistance. And yes, some type of stretching, I'll say, is probably the most important activity you need to do. But that is not what you're ever going to learn in going to a fitness gym, I hate to say, or to a personal trainer. It's not about sustainability, because what I said as a physician, I'm more worried about I look at labs. The most common lab that incredibly disintegrates, and I can't tell you how many 25-year-olds I've seen with terrible kidney function because they've just pounded protein to death, thinking that they're going to build muscle, or they're taking testosterone. It's like, I'm going to build all this muscle. Yeah, you're building your muscle at the expense of your organs. You're driving them to death. What's going to happen when you're 50 at this rate? It doesn't suddenly recover. So we need to be mindful of that type of activity. And of course, the number one activity is still this. And this is how I walk my dog. She's very lazy, but she's very cute. So she doesn't like to walk because she's a princess. She comes to my office with me every day and she just wanders around waiting for patients to pick her up so that they can pet her. She literally gets held and carried around most of the day. So when we go for a walk, we don't pick her up, she looks, what do you want me to do? The other thing that has become very evident is that many types of activity that people do are going to create chronic back pain. And the reason you're creating chronic back pain is because the activity is putting people too much into flexion. Meaning this, greatest yoga is that activity, and we're looking specifically at the spine. Every activity that you do should end with some form of back flexion. So over a ball is great, or just bend over backwards, because it's the total opposite motion that virtually all exercise activity puts us in. And we're working now with a chiropractor in Scottsdale who totally going against, I'll say, all chiropractic teaching. He says, everything you learn in chiropractic school, to him speaking, means nothing. It's totally wrong physiologically. He's a nuclear engineer, whatever his previous training was. He looks at the spine strictly from a very straight engineering perspective. He looks at every type of problem that people have had, and he said the main problem that people have with their spine is they drive their vertebrae anterior. And he says, all I do is move it posterior. That's my entire practice. Just moving people's vertebrae posteriorly. And you know, what it does is it takes facets that are jammed and opens them up. And he says suddenly you don't need surgery. Suddenly you don't have all these back problems. I said it's totally anti-chiropractic. It's not about twisting somebody and creating this and that. It's a very interesting model. He said the most important thing you can have people do is that activity. Is literally some form of a back bend. So I'm going to show you a little video here. I think it's great.
Lecture I'm calling 23 and a half hours. So I have a big interest in preventive medicine, which can mean a lot of things from, cancer screening to eating more fiber to having a good social network, and I mean that in the old sense of the word. Weighing less, drinking less, smoking less, controlling your blood pressure, cholesterol, and so on and so forth. So all these things are incredibly important, and I wouldn't want you to minimize your efforts in any one category, but I want to know what comes first. What has the biggest impact? What is the biggest return on investment? What makes the biggest difference to your health? So I did my research, and I found an answer, at least for me, and it's tricky because, all these things are sort of overlapping. But I picked up this intervention, and because of its breadth, it worked for so many different health problems, and that's what I found so cool about it. So just to kind of walk you through a quick list. So this intervention in patients with knee arthritis who receive 1 hour of treatment 3 times a week reduced their rates of pain and disability by 47%. In older patients, it reduced progression to dementia and Alzheimer's by around 50%. For patients at high risk of diabetes and coupled with other lifestyle interventions, it reduced progression to frank diabetes by 58%. Postmenopausal woman who had 4 hours a week of the treatment had a 41% reduction in the risk of hip fracture. It reduced anxiety by 48% in a big meta-analysis. Patients suffering from depression, 30% were relieved with low dose, and that bumped to 47% as we increased the dose. Following over 10,000 Harvard alumni for over 12 years, those that had the intervention had a 23% lower risk of death than those who didn't get the treatment. It's the #1 treatment of fatigue, and of course, the kind of outcome of choice there, my favorite outcome is quality of life, which is really all of the above, and really about making your life better. And this treatment has been shown over and over again to improve quality of life. So the question is, what's the medicine, and what is 23 and a half hours? So the medicine was exercise, mostly walking, so not triathlons. And let me just put it a different way. I think what I'm asking you to do is, if you think about your typical day, so there's 24 hours, and so you might spend most of your day, this varies obviously, but couch surfing, sitting at work, sleeping, and what the evidence that I'm going to show you tells me is the best thing you can do for your health is to spend half an hour being active, maybe an hour, and that if you can do that, you can realize all the benefits I described in the previous slides. So let's just take a quick walk through some of the literature. So Stephen Blair, he's a professor at the Arnold School of Public Health at the University of South Carolina, and he looked at this in what's called the aerobic center longitudinal study, which followed over 50,000 men and women over time. And along the left side of this graph is something called attributable fractions, which is kind of a fancy word, but it's the estimate of the number of deaths in a population that would have been avoided if that specific risk factor had been erased. So for example, turning a smoker into a non-smoker, or a couch potato into a daily walker. And along the bottom is the typical risk factors. You can see the hypertension is incredibly important, and so on and so forth. But the one that was that kind of applied the most risk was this sort of mysterious CRF, which is cardiorespiratory fitness, which is really low fitness. So low fitness was the strongest predictor of death. And this is important. Most of the trials we see, to be honest, are funded by pharma or other companies because they've got a drug for hypertension or high cholesterol or diabetes. And we rarely see fitness thrown into the mix. And so it's nice to see a trial that's not so siloed. Blair's work is interesting. He also did another trial looking at obesity. What he found was, sort of two things. One is obesity and no exercise. That's a very bad combination, and that's where we saw many of the negative consequences of obesity from a health point of view. But if the obese person was active, even if they didn't have the weight loss, but were just active and obese, that was much, much better, and that the exercise ameliorated much of the negative consequences of obesity. So if exercise is a medicine, what's the dose? So when I think of dose, I think of how long, how often, and how intense. I'm going to give you a slightly mixed message, but essentially more activity is better. But I must say the rate of return seems to decline after 20 or 30 minutes a day. So if you're being active less than 150 minutes a week, or more if you're a kid, an hour a day if you're a kid, my flag goes up in the clinic. So my personal take on this is that the literature draws a very broad brush, and so we see big differences when somebody goes from not doing anything to doing something, and after that the return is more granular. So if we took the Nurses' Health Study, women who went from zero activity to just 1 hour a week reduced their heart disease rates by almost half. So you can break it down, so it can be 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes if you want to do 30 minutes of exercise, so it can be broken into 3. Higher intensity, it looks like it's equivalent to less time with lower intensity. But I think obviously the clinical pearl is mostly thinking about your style and habits and your personal cues. So if you're only going to do it if it's pre-booked with friends, I've couples that take a half-hour walk every morning or evening to organize their life. A dog is a great walking coach. The data is showing 67% of dog walkers achieve 158 minutes a week just with the dog walking. And finally, of course, your commute, getting out of stop early, taking the stairs, and so on and so forth. So thinking about that, I'm just going to walk you through some quick slices of the literature. The first one comes from Japan. In the 90s, Japan required all employers to conduct annual health screens for their employees. And so a large gas company in Japan called Osaka used this to answer a great question. So if people's walk to work was longer, did that reduce their chance of serious health problems? So in this example, high blood pressure. And what they found is under 10-minute walk, no difference. 11 to 20-minute walk, 12% reduction in rates of high blood pressure or hypertension. And over a 21-minute walk, a 29% decrease in rates of high blood pressure. So the authors calculated that for every increase of 10 minutes in your walk to work, there was a 12% reduction in the likelihood of getting high blood pressure. The second exhibit is looking at stents. So this is something we commonly do down medicine. So you can see on the left here, the artery is blocked. On the right, a vascular surgeon's gone in and put in a balloon, opened it up, and left the stent to keep it open, which makes great sense. So a German researcher named Rainer Hambrecht looked at this with about 100 cardiac patients. He got half the group to exercise, and by that I mean 20 minutes a day on an exercise bicycle, and then once weekly 60-minute aerobics class. And the other half got the high-tech stent and just their sort of normal activity. And after 1 year, 88% of the exercises were event-free compared to 70% of the people that got a stent. So both worked, but I find it sort of incredible that the low-tech made a bigger difference. And you have to remember that the stent just fixes one part of the heart. The next way to think about it is the reverse. So what I call sitting disease. We know that being sedentary is bad for your health, but a researcher named Leonard Bierman wanted to quantify this, and he did so down in Australia in a big study they did there. They found, compared with persons who watch no TV, those that spend a lifetime average of 6 hours a day watching TV can expect to live about 5 years left. I mean, that's incredible. But then I think, who watches 6 hours a day of TV? It turns out the average adult in the USA spends about 5 hours a day watching TV or screens. So I find this fascinating that we never think of the TV as something that's bad for our health, but clearly it's as powerful as many other risk factors for chronic disease. So I'm just going to leave you with, I guess, 2 quotes. So one is Jerry Garcia, the singer who was the lead singer for the Grateful Dead, and he says, somebody has to do something. It's incredibly pathetic that has to be us. And I think that's true. It has to be us. As Hippocrates said, walking is man's best medicine. And so I'm going to finish by asking you a question. And this may have some personal challenges for you. So, you might be very busy with work or kids or both, and you may be in pain or have other priorities. But my question to you is, can you limit your sitting and sleeping to just 23 and a half hours a day? So something to think about. Thank you very much.
Once again, I'll say, if you look at children, how many hours kids are standing in front of a screen? Many hours, starting literally from the get-go. It's a very destructive component of health that unfortunately enough people aren't aware of, enough of our patients aren't aware of at this point. Let's go back to this. So, another law is water, the necessity of hydrotherapy. Water is probably the most amazing element on the earth because you can use it in various forms, in the liquid form, as ice and as steam, and all three have very applicable aspects in the aspect of supporting our health. The most important aspect of this one is up here, is the shower, and the removable shower head is the key component. So you go to Home Hardware or Home Depot, whatever, and unscrew your shower head and attach this removable shower head. The reason it's important is because many people who have a variety of different types of chronic issues, the best treatment you can do for any type of chronic pain anywhere is to do alternating applications of hot and cold. The easiest way to apply it is with water. In fact, when you finish your shower, you always turn the hot water off first. You finish with cool to cold. It's very invigorating, and over time you'll find that the temperature difference that you tolerate increases significantly over time. So, and then the removable shower head basically can be used on any particular body part, whether it's a knee, your neck, your back, your pelvic area, or prostate for a man, whatever. And I think it should be the type of thing that, like air filters in houses and water filters in houses, removable shower head should be a part of everyday home necessity, and it really significantly improves things. In addition to the shower, of course, there's other ways of doing water, whether it's in a therapeutic bath where you can put essential oils, or warming socks if you have any type of congestion, or alternating hot and cold to the sinus, or sinus lavage, or nebulizers for any type of chronic sinus problem. And I would guess in our clinic, no matter what somebody comes in for, I would say 70% of people have a chronic sinus problem, and about 2% know it, because they have no symptoms. And it's so cold in there that the immune system can't even rouse the person's immune system to tell them that there's some type of chronic issue. So, and they're not getting headaches, they don't have any discharge, they may occasionally, I may have some postnasal drip. It's such a common problem. And it's such a common problem because antibiotics have been overprescribed, and most of those infections are fungal or mold that's living in people's sinuses. And it creates a huge detriment to people's health. The system that most people don't know about is the lymphatic system. And the main reason they don't know about it is because there's no lymphologist. There's no specialist in the lymph system. You can't go and find a lymphologist. Well, you can find a rheumatologist or a cardiologist or a gastroenterologist or any other ologist. And why do you think that is? There's no specialty of lymphology because there's no pharmaceutical that supports the lymphatic system. The way you support the lymphatic system is movement. The lymph system, which has about 4 times more fluid in it than your cardiovascular system, doesn't have a pump. It has one-way valves, and of course located along it are all these lymph nodes. And if you get sick and you feel them in your neck or in your groin area because they're near the surface, the the reality is they're all over your body. And 70% of them lie between breastbone and pelvic bone, and need to be supported on an ongoing basis. And how do we support it? Generally, deep breathing, regular movement, castor oil packs, dry skin brushing, and lymphatic massage. So, how many of you have ever heard of a castor oil pack? Oh, good, most of you. Perfect. And how many of you do it? Oh, perfect. Fewer, but you still know. So, castor oil is the only oil which creates the effect that we're looking for. It has been known, castor oil has been known about for at least the last 2,000 or 3,000 years because the ancient Egyptians talk about it, the use of castor oil. Castor oil is best applied, in my clinical experience, using a piece of cotton flannel onto which we apply the castor oil and then apply it basically over the abdominal area where you have 70% of your immune function, more or less. This does not act as a poultice. The castor oil from the flannel gets absorbed into your lymphatic system. And if we were to take a blood draw, do a castor oil pack, 2 hours later repeat the blood draw, you will find that your white count will have improved. So it's the #1 treatment for people doing cancer treatments. It's the way I've been able to, when supporting people doing cancer treatments, so that they don't have to miss one of their treatments. It will keep their white count elevated adequately so that in other words, we shouldn't just be using it for cancer patients. We need to be using it for everybody. The other aspect that supports this is dry skin brushing. Dry skin brushing is literally moving the lymph towards where it ends, and it ends right here. At this area is below the collarbone on the left side, which ultimately dumps back into the cardiovascular, which then goes to the liver for elimination. The key here is that the word is dry. It's a dry treatment. It's not done in the shower. We're not doing it to debride the skin. We're doing it to stimulate the lymph system. The most common error that people make when doing dry skin brushing is they use way too much pressure. The amount of pressure is, if you were to close your eyes, you would barely feel it touching and wonder, gee, is that even touching my skin? That's the amount of pressure. It's like a feather. If you're doing it hard, you're just debriding skin and you're actually congesting your lymphatic system. So everywhere starting with the extremities, you move up the body, move up the arms, head moves down. You're moving it always towards this area. 30 seconds. Last thing you do before you go to bed. It's the best thing you can do to basically get your lymphatic system moving, because your lymphatic system is most active during the night. That's why we don't do it. If you do it in the shower, you're not doing lymphatic stimulation. What you're doing is basically just debriding old dead skin, which is fine. But that's not dry skin brushing. Sleep. An essential law. A few rules here that's important. First of all is sleep in total darkness. It's essential. Where do people used to sleep? In caves, where it's totally dark. They didn't, Edison made a huge mistake. These damn lights, Thomas Edison, he screwed us all up by having these lights come on at nighttime. So if you can't get your room totally black, then you should wear an eye mask. And it should stay on, and the reason that we need to do that is because it's important to stimulate a very important gland called the pineal gland, which releases melatonin, but more importantly, it sets your immune system. Everybody thinks it's just about the melatonin. The pineal gland, in my opinion, is the most important endocrine gland there is, and it's one nobody talks about. Unless I take melatonin because I can't sleep. So the question is, well, that's fine, but why can't your pineal gland make melatonin? Shouldn't that be the question you're asking? Not, I need to take melatonin. If you need to take melatonin to sleep, it's not about melatonin, it's about why can't my pineal gland make it? And what's interesting, when they do MRIs of people's head for whatever reason, up to 75% of people have calcified pineal glands. And they don't say, well, I wonder why it's, you know, what they say, oh, we used it as our measuring stick. Oh, your tumor was this size and it was 4 centimeters from the calcified pineal gland. Not, I wonder why the pineal gland's calcified. And you know what the most common thing that calcifies it? Fluoride. Which is rampant, of course, in many cities. Fluoride calcifies the pineal gland. The pineal gland sets every other endocrine organ. It sets your circadian rhythm. It sets your immune system. If you don't sleep in the dark and wake up in the light, you're not turning your pineal gland on and off. It's such an important treatment. The other important thing is to have no Wi-Fi in the bedroom. No cell phones, no iPads, no televisions. That's you know, yes, we live in a society where we have Wi-Fi everywhere. You should try and at least make the place where you're sleeping the sanctuary that you are not getting exposed to that type of radiation. The ideal is not 6 hours because, as I said earlier, if you're only sleeping 6 hours, you're missing the most effective REM sleep, which typically happens in the early morning hours, usually somewhere between 4 and 6, 5 and 7. That 2-hour span is the most restorative sleep you can get. The other thing about the time you go to bed is ideally between 10 and 11. That's for a physiologic reason. Physiologically, it's because your cortisol levels are going down and your growth hormone levels are starting to go up. You know, and if you want to watch Jimmy Fallon, too bad. You're going to have to record it because he ain't on at 10 o'clock at night. But, you know, we need to look at physiology. The other thing that people are not aware of that they need to be doing is raising the head of their bed, which, you know, is another component. People always think, oh, why am I raising the head of my bed? I always thought I had to put my head lower if I want more blood into my head. No, it's just the opposite. Ideally, you raise the head of the bed, assuming that you can, depending on the nature of the way your bed is, with a block or a piece of wood, 4 to 6 inches. And when I first heard that, I said, how does that work? And then the person who explained it to me said, well, if you look at this tree over here, and we know that the leaves at the top of this tree are somehow getting nutrition, and it's like, it's not coming from the air, it's coming from the ground. So somehow the nutrition for these leaves are going up the tree. It's called osmotic pressure. Same thing happens in our body through our electrolytes, our solutes. So the raising of the head of the bed is an incredibly important daily thing. Sleeping in the dark, going to bed at 10, no Wi-Fi. It is amazing how those things improve people's health. Just those things. Then suddenly you say, well, maybe I don't need melatonin. Because there's other things that are going on in that regard. Meditation, relaxation, deep breathing. And you don't necessarily have to do that pose. You can sit in a chair, close your eyes, you don't even have to close your eyes, and just try and center yourself, ground yourself, try and get your body's energy back down to where it came from, which is the earth. Another great thing for grounding, since you have grass in your part of the country, we don't have any grass where I live, so we can't do this. But in the morning, especially as the days get warmer, and you have dew on the grass in the morning, walk in the dew, in bare feet. It's incredibly grounding to your nervous system. In the wintertime, what you need to do is you need to, in your garage or basement, make a box, sand box, put sand in there, and every day go down in there and just stand in there in bare feet and pull the sand through your toes. So in the wintertime, that's what you do. In the summertime, you get out and walk in the grass. Two of the most effective grounding things you can do for yourself. It gets you out of your head. It's especially for people who said, you go to bed, I either can't fall asleep or I wake up and I come back, what are you doing? I'm thinking about things. They can't ground themselves. They can't pull that energy out of their head. So they're always in their head. So they need something to pull that energy down. Meditation will do that as one of the things, but so will walking on the dew. So the summary, be outside 30 minutes, do something fun, 100 deep breaths, some form of movement, casserole, dry skin brushing, be in bed on time, raise the head of the bed, daily prayer and meditation. Natural laws that will support any and every person. Doing those things will improve most people's direction towards optimal performance by at least 30 or 40%, irregardless of anything else that they're doing. So it's an important piece of this. So the last part of this is just some basic ideas about food and eating. You know, we see all these ads for weight loss. Well, if you want to lose weight, do number 1 to 9, and you'll lose weight. Guarantee it. Apple cider vinegar. It's like, what are we using apple cider vinegar for? It's like, I have reflux. So why would I take an acid if I have reflux? That's what the patient says. But now, this isn't about an acid. This is about starting the digestive process, because what's happened for most people is that there's no connection between their brain and their digestive system. It's literally been, the wire's been cut. And that's because, on average, 18 out of 21 meals, or 17 out of 21 meals a week in this country are eaten away from home. Which means, well, there's not a whole lot of things happening in the house as far as cooking, smelling food, having a family gathering, which is like, seems like a pretty high statistic, but it is. So, smelling the food, cooking, think about what you're eating, chewing food well. If you chew your food well, in fact, about 85% of your digestion can happen in your mouth before you swallow it, start the digestive process. What typically happens, you just have to look at people at a restaurant. You know, they put it in, and before they even swallow it, the next one's coming. You know, it's like it's a continuous thing. Just keep bending your elbow, and then they you know, they're finished, but the brain hasn't decided that any food's got in yet. So it says, well, I guess we need to keep eating because I'm not full. And then 15 minutes later, it said, oh my God, I think I ate too much. If you put your fork down, just that, number 5, you will lose at least 5 pounds, assuming you need to, in the next year, if that's the only thing that you do. Because what it does, it will slow you down enough that your body, your brain will catch up to your GI, and you'll eat exactly the right number of calories for your metabolism, without having to worry about, oh, I need to do what Oprah's doing with Weight Watchers. Number 6 is, for many people, is a tough one. Not drinking with meals. Now, you should drink up to 15 minutes before and wait till 15 minutes after to drink anything. Why? Because it just further dilutes your digestive enzymes, that type of thing. So the reason that started, number 6, people drinking with meals, is because of restaurants. You know, it's the only reason. You go to a restaurant, first thing, what do you want to drink? So that's sort of what started it. And you all have pets, or many of you will have pets. What I guarantee what you do with your pet is watch your pets eat. So put the water there and put the food there. And watch how many times they're eating and then stop eating, going, oh, I think I'll have a drink of water. And then they come back and eat again. And then they go, and it doesn't happen. Pets don't drink when they eat. Animals don't drink when they eat. Only humans do, which is the worst thing you can do for your physiology. So the goal is chew more. You'll use your saliva to moisten the food, so it won't be so difficult to swallow. That's obviously the main goal. Give thanks, eat in a peaceful place, sit and relax after you eat, as opposed to rushing up doing something. Apple cider vinegar, the idea is using the organic apple cider vinegar with the mother. You know, there's a whole variety of different, there's no single diet that is appropriate for any one individual, so we have to individualize it. You know, we have all these different types of diets that become individualized to your specific situation. There are some better than others. The only diet I want to say something about is the ketogenic diet. That is now my personal bias for cancer patients, because it's the best way to starve a cancer cell, is to give the body fat, because cancer cells do not know how to metabolize fat. They love carbohydrates, because insulin, cancer cells have a 4 times greater opportunity to take up glucose than they do fat. They haven't figured out how to metabolize that. You'll literally starve cancer cells. So what you eat, despite what some oncologists will say, has a huge impact on the success when managing cancer patients. It's pretty important. But we obviously individualize that to what anybody's doing. Now, the most important thing about whatever diet you do is how many colors are you eating. There's great research a year ago. It used to be 3 and then it was 5. Now it's 10. 10 different colors of food a day. And white isn't a color.
Cauliflower?
Fine. The greater the variety that you have, the more likely you will have a reduced risk of stroke, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, cancer, and dying prematurely, just by eating different colors of food. That should be a goal. In fact, it was interesting, yesterday it was in the Cape, and I was staying at bed and breakfast, and the owner came and said, "Came to your talk last night, I'm going to change all my menus now, I'm going to make sure that people who stay here get 10 different colors." That's pretty impressive, you know, for what's going to happen. That's really what needs to happen for people. So, you know, there's a variety of different, whether it's an anti-inflammatory diet or whether it's a paleo diet, you know, becomes individual for what any specific person is, or a ketogenic diet. And even though, you know, I talk about ketogenic, I don't try and put necessarily the cancer patient into ketosis. But what I'm most interested in is we're not spiking their insulin, because that's the biggest issue that we're trying to do, and been pretty successful with being able to do that. And of course, this is my optimal. The balanced temperament diet, which I didn't talk about, is really your ideal diet. Temperament is a whole different subject. You may have heard of temperament. I suspect when you went through high school, everybody read a Shakespeare play, and all the characters in his play were of a different temperament. And you were all of a different temperament, or there's an overlap and mix. And the diet that is the most suitable to you is exactly the diet that will suit your temperament. And generally what happens when as people start to feel better and get closer and closer to their optimal performance, you don't have to tell them what they'll eat. They'll say, when I eat this, I feel the best. And it always correlates to their temperament diet, because that's historically, you know, how your body has evolved. And so that becomes individual. That's a goal to work towards in time. I love this slide because it means I don't have to do anything. You know, other than tell you a joke now and then, it would be a goal. So the reality is, there isn't any doctor who's going to cure you anything. All we can do is try and help you understand and facilitate a physiologic process. When you understand the physiologic process and are willing to take on the 99% that's required for you personally, then you start saying, well, doctor, where's the magic pill? There's no magic pill. There never will be. Biological medicine is about not giving magic pills. Biological medicine is about helping you to be educated, to create a proper assessment so that you understand what the physiologic processes are. And when you understand those processes and follow what we say are natural laws, then we get into the ability to be able to understand how easy or difficult this journey is. And it's not necessarily easy.
Brilliant. It's not a hockey game.
Yeah.
Go.
make it? Yeah, she made it. So, does that mean you can make it? Absolutely, it means you can make it. Is it hard? It's really hard. Is it something that you have to do for yourself on an everyday basis? Yep, it's exactly what you need to do. As you know, it said in that first one, you know, that Jerry Garcia said, you know, it's too bad you have to look after yourself, but it's up to us if we have to do it. But that is the reality of what health is all about. You know, our goal is to help people facilitate the journey that they're on to get to where it is that they need to get to. So, you know, when people will come to the clinic, it's not what we do in the clinic that's going to ultimately be the big change. You know, the whole idea of having a clinic here is to give you tools, to create an understanding, to allow you to do the assessments that will facilitate you to create an understanding that you probably haven't been at before. When you start to understand, even though whether you're coming because of you have anxiety or depression or, you know, stage whatever, cancer or, you know, BMI, it doesn't matter what it is. That's not what our goal is. Our goal truly is to help you understand the processes of how you got here. Important in that process is understanding your childhood, understanding those learned perceptions that got you to the place where you are now today. And, you know, years ago, over the last 20 years, I have worked with a specific protocol that I've developed that allows people to literally retrace their entire developmental structure of all their organs, their entire nervous system, which is pretty empowering for patients. It's just as difficult as going up that escalator was for people to do it, because it brings up a lot of things that sometimes are not the most pleasant memory for them, because you start reliving things that you probably have forgotten about that you wish you didn't remember. But it allows people to work through them. It allows people to reprogram all this unconsciousness that's going on. So there are several things that I believe everybody should do on an ongoing basis, which includes essential fatty acids. Even if you eat salmon and fish 3 or 4 times a week, where you have lots of seafood available to you. You know, there's a reason that omega fatty acids are good, not only for our cardiovascular system, but also for our brain. Specifically, the DHA that's in the omega-3 is particularly helpful and beneficial. Another thing that I believe is essential are probiotics. There's been so much research on this in the last 25 years, but the reality is they've been around for over 100 years. But they're only sort of making it into the whole idea of commonly. You see the ads on television all the time now. What's interesting, when I started teaching about probiotics 20 years ago, you know, the amounts of probiotics that we were using in a kid was often just 1 to 2 billion. We felt that that was enough. You know, an adult was maybe 5 to 10 billion. But now that there's been so much more research with the importance of, we call it the gut-brain connection. So we now know that, like, with depression and irritable bowel and many of those types of things, it's really about probiotics. And people who have inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, if you look at the numbers that we're talking about, but these are the numbers that have been shown to be the most therapeutically beneficial. And even though that's a big number, it's still but a drop in the bucket for the number of organisms that we have in our digestive tract. But that's what it takes to ultimately create the change that we're looking for. The other thing that I think is important are this idea of micronutrients. You know, if we look at the different stages of growing plants, the fact that we need different minerals, we as humans need these same micronutrients. And statistically, there's something like, in the most recent reading, there's about 83% of you in this room are deficient in at least one mineral, statistically. So I believe minerals are much more important than vitamins in general. And so I'm a huge believer that minerals should be in, so on an ongoing daily basis. So why do we need a supplement? It's interesting. It was 1936 that this was published. We know that vitamins are complex chemical substances which are indispensable to nutrition, and that each of them is important for normal function for a special structure of the body. Lacking vitamins, the body may make some use of minerals, but lacking minerals, vitamins are useless. Taking a vitamin pill is useless, in my opinion. It's taking the minerals that's important. Vitamins are easy, minerals are hard. So that's why I personally prefer to supplement minerals when I do vitamins. That was, once again, in 1936, and then this very astounding thing that Linus Pauling said, you can trace every disease, every illness, and every ailment ultimately to a mineral deficiency, which is pretty shocking statistic. And no matter how well people eat, I virtually always supplement minerals, because no matter well it is, because if they had sufficient, we probably wouldn't be in the place where they are specifically. And we can look at all these different systems and pinpoint specific individual, but the reality is you need them all, and we need them all every day on an ongoing basis. That's an important aspect. And we're not just looking at what does the cardiologist say, or what does the gastroenterologist say. It's like, what does the body say for what's going on? So, what does it mean? It means that, the name of the disease is not that important. It's not what we go after. I'm not a specialist in Lyme disease. I'm not a specialist in cancer. I'm not a specialist in fibromyalgia. I'm not a specialist in anything. Except, I believe I am a specialist in biological medicine. That basically has the opportunity to help everybody, from literally the one-day-old baby to somebody who's 99 years old, and everybody in between. And because we don't specialize on diseases, we specialize on people. We have the idea that my bias is that biological medicine really is the only complete medical healthcare system that makes any sense, because it is the system that truly looks at everything. And there's many different ways to approach this type of medicine, which is a good thing. And there's many different type of people with different therapies. In the clinic when it's open later after summer and the fall, if you go to our clinic here in Providence, you'll see a whole bunch of therapies that you won't generally see anywhere else, because they're designed to help multiple organ systems. They're designed to help your body return to a place of normal physiology. But it still comes down to being able to accurately assess where is the problem. And there's many ways of looking at it. And a common problem I always ask is, well, is this functional medicine? And it's not functional medicine. And the main difference, it's not technically naturopathic medicine either, but everything overlaps. Functional medicine, in my experience, are doctors who do thousands of dollars worth of tests and then treat the test without treating the body. So they treat the test and then they retest. Oh, this is off. Now we'll treat this. But nobody ever asks, but why is it off? So you do a test and say, well, your fatty acids are low. Okay, take fatty acids. But why are your fatty acids low? Or you go to an endocrinologist and he says, oh, your TSH is too high. Your thyroid is off. Take thyroid hormone. It's like, okay, that will make you feel better, but why is your thyroid off? We don't ask enough questions. And if you don't ask enough questions, you don't get to the root of the problem. Until we get to the true root of the problem, that's how you get cured. But I'm not here to say it's easy. As that going up that escalator showed, you go up, you come back, you go up, you come back, you go up, you come back, you go up, you come back. That's the way you recover your health. You find a team of practitioners who can put the whole thing together. And unfortunately, if you're at a place of chronic disease, you need a team, because you can't just hope the body heals on its own. Because unfortunately, physiologically, we know that's not possible to be able to do that. So, that's it. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
I just heard an incident on this hour therapy this past weekend, and Dr. Rowan mentioned just in passing, I haven't had a chance to research it, that omega fatty acids were damaging to the mitochondria, to eat a proper diet, and actually take them.
There's going to be lots of different types of theories about things, and I think when you do, so the question was, if you take essential fatty acids, will it be damaging to the mitochondria, which are sort of carbs? I believe you're going to find lots of research, and I call it a functional medicine approach, where you're only looking at one component of this. And if you look at everything about the body, you'll find that essential fatty acids are absolutely essential. that's what my approach will be, and that's what I've found. Because you can say if you have an ideal diet, but with all due respect, there isn't anybody in this room who's eating an ideal diet, because I know nobody, or virtually nobody, who eats their temperament diet, and that is the ideal diet. And since people haven't figured out what their temperament is, what the heck's an ideal diet? Yes?
I work with a lot of families who have children with autism and a variety of things, and one of the tools that we have that has really found very helpful is the methylation cycle.
Yes.
So once we understand the genetic SNP, then we compare it to some of the labs that we're getting, and have kind of a picture of the puzzle, so to speak. And it's been helping to drive a lot of the treatment choices that the families are choosing. So there's certain treatments that they probably shouldn't do, and maybe some that they should consider, based upon the combination of everything.
Methylation is probably the most common SNP that's been looked at. But now that we have over 2 million, maybe 4 million that have been identified.
Well, we're looking at about 18 of them.
Yeah,
18
so,
of them within how does the body assimilate, how does the body detox, and then basically drives the treatment decision.
so that comes down to, and why is there a problem in the first place? It goes down to this miasm, temperament, and constitution. So my approach is, that's great that you're doing that to support it, but you have to back up even farther and saying, how am I going to balance that, what they genetically inherited? It's not about genes.
It's about expression.
It's about the expression of the gene, which is epigenetics, and that goes down to what we call your terrain.
Right.
We take it back a step further.
Well, exactly, so you had the pass-real test, so I know intuitively that the CDS mutation doesn't do as well as the pass-real test. Things like that.
Sure. Sure. Any other questions? Yes.
Will you do any testing in your practice, or?
Will we do any testing?
Yeah, like,
Yeah, that's going to be the most important component of it, because testing, without doing the testing, you won't be able to figure out anything. We have to do a full assessment to be able to give you some, and I can tell you typically, the average person who comes to our clinic in Scottsdale, and I'm sure will come here, will have at least 5 organ systems that are not working properly. They'll need support of at least 5 organ systems.
do you have like a basic panel, or what type of testing are you?
It's beyond that. It's lots of energetic. We do HRV testing, we do digital pulse analysis testing, we do in-body analysis testing, we do zygo scan testing, we do bioenergetic type testing. And yes, we do routine, blood screening and stuff, but, blood screening is 95% of blood screen tests are normal before you even do the test, because that's the way they set them up. They're so unhelpful in trying to identify truly what are the underlying problems. But they're a ballpark, and you're lucky to find the ballpark with a blood test. If you don't get into the ballpark, you may find it, but that's what all a blood test will do. We do things that are much more specific for the individual.